Welcome to the Work Culture Debates. This month we are talking about generations and your culture and your strategy. Does it matter? How much does it matter? What should you take into consideration? Let's do introductions first. I'll go, then David, Deborah, and Shannel. I help mission driven organizations by identifying the hidden misalignments that are holding their organizations back. At Stokefire, we go after the cause of your challenges so that you're not paying to fix the same issue every few years. Just opened up our 2023 strategic planning package for orgs that need to know exactly how the pandemic impacted them and how to move forward to the mid 2020s. David, you're up.
Hey, David Shar with Illuminate PMC. Thank you, Britni. I help organizations. Within industrial organizational psychology, like just given the name itself, there's so many complex constructs and concepts that actually make such a big difference in your workplace. But how are you supposed to know what any of this means? So I love helping organizations by coming in as a speaker, as a trainer, or as a consultant to help translate these things into meaningful operational tactics and strategies to better your culture. I also am wearing a t-shirt right now, and I feel like naked in a t-shirt, but I wanted to show off my friend. I don't know if I've got that model body, but I do org change stuff. This is Shannel. So if you are in IO or just a fan of IO or just looking to support Shannel, you got to go to her page. We're going to have to put a link in there or something. But Shannel, do you know what it is offhand?
IO Psych Nerd at Etsy. It's an Etsy shop.
On Etsy. Nice. Now I'm going to go get dressed while Deborah or Shannel go next.
Do that.
Deborah, you're up.
That's great. That's a great way to start this live, definitely. So hi, I'm Deborah Collazo. I'm the founder and principal consultant of DMC Consulting. I'm here based in Puerto Rico. I help small and medium businesses to remove barriers related to culture, structure, and human resource management so that all organizations can grow effectively.
Awesome. And last,
there you go.
Okay. As Britni's pointed out in the past, I don't feel fully dressed if I'm not wearing a sweater. So this also is like semi-naked for me.
Awesome. Well, I'm Shannel Winslow. I sell t-shirts apparently. So check out my IO Psych Nerd Etsy shop. But also I help organizations kind of move through change. I feel like, the only thing that's constant in an organization is change, and yet every organization is always surprised by it, right? So basically, I helped build sustainable organizations that not only can, move through change, but anticipate it and actually find it enjoyable. So that's what I do, and I'm super excited about it. Oh, and I got on my t-shirt too. Wait. Because IO Psych is STEM.
Nice. Love it.
I should have worn mine. It also comes in orange,
Whoa.
which is Britni's brand color. I should have worn mine today.
So, I might be biased, but I absolutely love that. I love that. So I have it in gold.
And the Work Culture Debates has its first sponsor. So Shannel will just send you the invoice afterwards.
That's right.
Okay, generations at work, how that is connected to your culture. I think we should start out by inviting the elephant in the room to the stage. Okay. Not a lot of research supports that generations at work, as we typically talk about it, is a real thing. So does it still matter? What do you think?
I think it matters, but I think it's dangerous. It's dangerous to talk about generations in a way where we are just the way we talk about them, especially because we're always talking, it almost seems like in a derogatory manner toward the youngest generation. And that term just changes, like, oh, those Gen Xers becomes, oh, those millennials becomes, oh, those Gen Zers. And we continue on, but we talk about them as a as a cohort that has to do with this uniqueness of their generation within the workplace, and we say they don't stick around with jobs, that their turnover is crazy, they don't care about the things that matter in the workplace, etc. But we lose sight of the fact that Gen Xers used to be the youngest cohort in our organizations, and so did boomers. And when they were the first generation or the youngest generation within the workforce, they also turned over more because people with less tenure and less education, maybe, and people who are just starting out in the workforce are still looking for that right fit. So they tend to job hop more than people who may be higher up in the organization, have their tenure, etc. I think it's important that we recognize the difference between generational cohorts and life stages within the workforce, because I do think that there are differences there. But if you have somebody who's, maybe older but newer to the workforce or newer to your organization, that's part of that newer cohort then, not part of that later cohort. So that's one thing that I'd say about that.
I think it's the difference between the generational experiences and generational differences. Right? I think that there is a generational experience, i.e., whether it's World War II, whether it's 9/11, whether it's .com, right? These generational experiences or these events in life where COVID, right? We all were impacted by it. Those will undoubtedly have different outputs and show up differently in different people, right? And so I think it's about us being able to understand that, yes, there is a cohort of individuals, to your point, David, that have gone through these types of experiences together and focus less on those quote unquote generational differences or trying to categorize or put all these people in a bucket, right? And say, because you went through this experience, you are going to show up this way. And more so, have it serve as a reference point, have it serve as an input into a larger model to be able to provide provide certain understanding or certain activities or certain cultures that will impact the masses. I just don't agree with the idea of these are generational differences because you were born in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. I think that it's a shared experience versus the actual differences themselves.
And wouldn't we all share the experiences? Not if we're not in the workforce yet, but even then, we kind of still share them, right? So my 15-year-old son wasn't alive during 9/11, so he just never knew the world without the NSA the way it is, and without,
Right.
he never knew a world where you could wait on the other side of security, in an airport for somebody without a plane ticket. He's never known that world. So we all sort of change as a world. COVID impacted all of us, and new technology impacts all of us. So wouldn't generations, regardless of which generation you are, as the world moves, we're all kind of impacted by those things.
Right.
We are. And I think that what we really have to talk about is where in our development as human beings we are in those moments where things impact us hugely, right? Like the people who are like the kids that are impacted by COVID right now, that are in kindergarten, will have a very different experience of this whole thing as the person who is maybe 60 years old in a company, just coming towards the end of their tenure in a company. So yes, these are shared experiences. Yes, all of these factors will impact our beliefs, our attitudes, our values, and of course our behaviors. But I agree with Shannel, it serves as a reference point so that we can then, for example, when it comes to companies, we need to understand what are the trends, what are the values, what are the attitudes of the people coming into organizations so that we can better retain them, so that we can better select them, so that we can better just recruit them in general. So these things I do think matter, but not exactly like Shannel says. I agree with her that it's not generational differences as a whole. I think it's shared experience, but also where in your development you are in that moment, whether you're in college, whether you're just graduating, whether you're changing careers. All of these things will also impact how you show up in the workplace and what are your attitudes, beliefs, and attitudes there.
And we've got a couple things in the chat. Adam Hall says, "Great insight, Chanel. I think we are all impacted, but we see things through different lenses. Whether it's previous experiences from living through world events, but also cultural differences and more." Which is a good point when you talk about generations. Who are you talking about? Are you talking about people growing up in the inner city? Are you talking about people growing up in, I just came from LA where you got those crazy mansions that I could fit like 5 of my houses in. Like, are they really experiencing these things the same way? Aliha Ingle said, being from different generations most certainly contributes to our expectation of management when engaging with others, but it doesn't mean particular trends apply to all members from that generation. Two great points.
That's an excellent way to put that, Aaliyah. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of my first clients brought me in because their retention rates were great, but they were worried about them because they were starting to trend up, even though like benchmarked against pretty much anyone, they were doing excellent. I started working with them before Gen Z was really coming into the workforce, and they're an insurance agency, right? So long history, stability, legacy, all of that is important to them. And that doesn't necessarily sound great to millennials who were moving a lot, but Gen Z, who wants to have financial stability and physical stability, their message of legacy, we've been here since this date, we're all about sustainability, consistency, that can really speak to this new generation. It matters. If they're not just the next millennials coming in. Like, you can really reach people because of who you are if you understand the expectations of the next group coming in, just like Deborah said. We're at risk when we ignore that a 23-year-old and a 63-year-old have fundamental different workplace expectations. But if we only use the lens of generations, I think that is also dangerous. When you're at a team meeting, for example, the power dynamics in the room, or the fact that somebody had a really rotten morning and they're coming into that room, those factors are going to be stronger than the generational factors in the room. That doesn't mean that generational factors don't exist right now, but there's other stuff that's more important. So I think just like applying any kind of lens or framework to the world, we need to understand there is something there. It's not the only thing. If we create a strategy for our culture that totally ignores generations and we just say, oh, well, every 25-year-old is like this when they enter the workplace, we're going to miss stuff. But we also can't say that it absolutely exists and all the cohorts are exactly the same within the groups.
So like, what if, for example, because I'm going to get a little spicy here, right?
Yeah, spicy.
Like, what if I just said, to your point, Britni, right? Like, generational differences don't exist, right? Like, let's just throw that out the door, right? Because this is a debate. And so what I mean by that is, whether I'm 23 or 63, we share that experience of, stock market crashing or COVID or Ukraine, Russia, or whatever this is, or school shootings or all of this, right? And shared experience plus culture and the ways in which we were raised. I'm gonna put it that way, right? Because a 23-year-old may be first generation, right? And they have an expectation of providing for the family and sending back and helping others and being an anchor for the family, right? Where stability may very well be very much enticing, right? They need that stability. They need that solid paycheck. They can't afford to hop from place to place to place, right? Because they have this weight on their shoulders, right? Same as the 63-year-old who, guess what, is also looking for stability and want that 20, 30, 40 years or whatever the case may be to show that they are a value add, they are part of the workforce, right? And so if I threw out this concept of generational differences or generations and just said that it's about shared experience, upbringing and a culture, value statement, right? And where they're trying to go in their lives, I'm not sure who said that, then is generation important? Right? Is this whole idea of Gen Z, Gen X just an easier way for us to bucket and market to masses?
Yes.
Or is it the lazy way to be able to say this is an easier way for us to be able to put these people in a bucket and do the things right for these folks? Versus if we peel back the onions, it's so much more complex than that, but richer.
Well, Deborah?
No, go ahead,
Oh,
David. I was
okay.
just like, yeah.
So Shannel, as the local guru in change management, you might appreciate this thought, and that is, so I was just at this conference, California HR conference, amazing conference, and there was a fellow speaker there named Jenny Cody Kangas. Um, yeah, and she's got this amazing story. She talks to people about technology and about chat GPT becoming part of our lives, etc. Her story in a nutshell, and I don't want to tell somebody else's story, etc., but in a nutshell, she hit her head shortly into the year 2020, and to this day has no memory of anything that happened before she hit her head. She was explaining to me how she is a native to all of this AI because she didn't know how to do it before. So now she's fresh-minded and she has all of these fresh ideas without being poisoned by that's how we've always done it. And so I think you're 100% right, Shannel, when you suggest that these things are being packaged as generational things. But as somebody who's given these generational talks before, I always get the feeling that my talk and that the pushback against about generations is always against the younger generation, and I think it's a pushback against change, because with this, we all, including the younger generation, we don't like change, right? We push back against change, but the younger generation doesn't have, they don't have the bad habits of the way it used to be, or even the good habits of the way it used to be. They know how it is now. They're coming in fresh. So I think so much of the generational stuff is exactly that. You've got this whole cohort of people who are coming in to the working world with new ideas and a fresh look at these tools, kind of like Jenny, who just has like a complete mind reset, like a blank slate. And so when we push it back against generations, we have to ask ourselves, is that what we're pushing back against? And that's why the best advice that people like us can give regarding these generations and how to bring them into the organization is to open our arms to them and to listen to them and give them a say, because really that's what it's about. They're bringing in the new stuff.
I think that I think it makes it easier definitely to talk about these things. So to Shannel's point, if we peel the layer, we know that there are things to peel and that there is a center that is much more complex, right? But to the everyday person managing a business, like I put myself in their shoes, right? And I do think that they needed a vocabulary to actually speak about the differences that are much more complex than they seem. So I do think it's an easier way to talk about these complex things. And that's why we've added that layer of generational differences and generational cohorts. Because if you look at the data, and just like Britni said, there is no empirical evidence that states that these generational differences exist. But it like we can't say that it doesn't exist, in the sense that it is a sociological concept. So there are values that are different, there are attitudes that are different, and they are commonly associated with individuals that were born and raised in particular historical periods. So even though it's not an empirical concept, it is a sociological concept, therefore it exists. And then I just think that we just need to manage those expectations and make sure that the people watching these videos and the leaders and the decision makers know, as Shannel says, it's much more complex than that. But I guess it is an easier way of talking about these very complex issues that are hard to just talk about in simple terms.
Right.
Yeah. When it comes,
Yeah,
David's
Madeline.
conclusion: we should implement amnesia into workplace practices. David, I did have a passing thought. I was like, can we figure out how to like do enough brain damage to get the right things so that
Right.
like our past is gone?
Rewire.
Which also though brings up the argument: what about the value of what the older cohorts bring? What about that value? Is there no value in it?
We tend to pay people for the challenges they can pull us through. So we might have a 25-year-old and a 55-year-old that are doing the same job, and we're going to pay the 55-year-old more. Now, sometimes that's because it's been there longer, but really what we should be paying them more for is maybe both of them can do the job equally well when things are fine. But when we are really up against it, we have unexpected pressures. There's a tidal wave that hits our company. That 55-year-old has seen a whole lot and has already pulled us through a lot of tidal waves. And that 25-year-old still needs to learn how to do that, what that feels like, build up that resilience. So there's so much worth in having the older generations as well. And one of the biggest ones is that they can pull us through challenges that young people just haven't seen yet. One of the questions about Gen Z is, do they have any resilience? I worry about this so much with my kids. I wonder weekly, where in the world is your resilience? Why can't you bounce back from this bad grade or this person making fun of you in the hallway? Like, it happens. It's going to keep happening. Like, you're 13, bad things are going to happen. But when we think about their life, they have so much extra psychological baggage. Like, my teenager came to me a few weeks ago and was really worried, wanted me to help her problem solve through something. She had a friend, they talk about what will happen in school shootings all the time. She had a friend who had this plan that if a school shooting happens, she's going to go up to a classmate that's already been shot, push her fingers into their fresh wound and smear their blood on her and play dead. So that's her friend's plan. This is horrendous. I can't imagine having this conversation with a friend at 13. But my kid said, I don't think that she'll have what it takes to actually do that. What should I help her come up with? Like, what's a better plan? These are the things that Gen Z is thinking through. I never thought about this when I'm getting a new job. Is this place safe? Do they know what to do when there's domestic violence and someone shows up? How do they fire people? What does empathy look like here? I didn't think about what happens if there's a gun and somebody that's not okay holding that gun on the campus or in the building. Gen Z isn't as resilient. We know that the research is showing that. They also have a lot more psychological baggage that they're walking into our workplace. But like Shannel said, is it just lazy? Us talking about all these generations? I do think there is some laziness in the same way that DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, in our organizations, we tend to stop at diversity. And we don't look into all of it. I think what can help here is active empathy. We're open and curious, and we teach our managers how to be open and curious. So it doesn't matter if this is a generational difference, a personality difference, a cultural difference. I'm still engaging and looking at them. And then empathetic place taking. Can I step into your shoes? Show me what that looks like. Help me understand why this conversation is frustrating to you or adding more load to you than it is the person next to you.
Mm-hmm.
Push back on me.
No, because Britni, let me tell you something. The fact that you got to have that conversation, like, geez, like my heart aches, because I know that that's the conversation that is taking place in the schoolyards, in the school, right? The fact that we are raising a generation of kids where this is their new normal. And so this is hard. This is very, very hard. I think to that point around resilience, and that point around just active empathy, I think there needs to be an element of active planning and a responsibility on the workforce. I'm not sorry, not the workforce, the organizations, to be able to go, all right, so what are my employees are going to need from me, giving these things that are taking place. Okay. And y'all know how I love a good strategic workforce plan. And just like they are looking at strengths, weakness, opportunities, and threats externally, they should be actively also looking at what this new workforce is needed in order to not just attract, but retain and take care of the talent that they have through these shared experiences and the things that they have to go through. Because to your point, that was happening. Like we had Columbine, I think in '93, right? Like we had, it was starting to be a thing, but now it's like every other week we're hearing about school shootings or taking guns to school or these types of things. That is a psychological impact, not to mention all the instantaneous data that they are feeding into their souls through phones, through laptops, through all of that we were just getting used to around the .gov, right? And around .com, sorry. So it's how do we again prepare and plan for the fallout or the output of these shared experiences that we can classify as Gen Z, Gen X, millennials, hell, baby boomers at this point in time is impacted, right? Like, how do you support the fact that they have to have these conversations with their grandkids and they can't even get their mind wrapped around that this is a thing, right? So it's like each one of these age groups or these folks, and to your point, Deborah, it's an easier way to have a very complicated conversation. But what are the things that are needed in order to support, people that are going through these shared experiences?
Yeah.
I agree. And that's why I think that strategy needs to be informed by the people who are working in the company, right? So in to Shannel's point, like what are you going to need from the company can only be a conversation that we can have if the company is listening, right? If the organization is in some way creating channels to receive the information. Because I constantly think about, yeah, like what do they need? But how do we know what they need? So what do you guys think about how can organizations really create those channels to really hear what the different demographics or what the different generations or the different culture members of different cultural groups need from the organization? What do you guys think about that?
People managers, supervisor training, having people in those roles to be able to have those conversations and creating trust, but not just from a standpoint of the training on the people managers, but the organization supporting the people managers, right? So people managers have what is a study show 5 to 7, 7 max, at least 5 or 3 to 7 direct reports. I myself do 3 to 5. But when you have people managers who have 12, 15 direct reports, right? And they have to pour into each one of these individuals, and heavens forbid that they don't even want to be people managers because the organization does not have an independent contributor track to the top. Don't get me started, y'all. But I think that if we are wanting to bubble that information up and actually get a space of trust, we need to support our people managers, and we have to create an organization that is that brings that transparency to the forefront and does not that actually does things with the things and the feedback that they receive versus just listening and going, oh, that's great, that's cute, and not doing anything with what is heard.
Yeah, I once had right around 150 direct reports. That was managing at a grocery store. It was about 150 people. Yeah, I mean, what are you supposed to do with that? But Stacy Lee also brings up this really great point. Thoughts on this wanted. Does using terms like lazy give us an excuse not to take responsibility for helping come up with a solution? And I think that Stacy, I think you're right on. I think that using terms like lazy and just generally othering, using terms like millennial turned Gen Z turned whatever, it's othering so that we don't have to take the personal responsibility, because it's a problem with the way kids are raised today or whatever it is, I think all of that comes into play. It's just a way of us not having to take care of the problem or take a serious look at the problem. When you look at the issues, like we're talking about anxiety, look at anxiety. Anxiety is up for all people. It happens to be spiking. The mental health crisis is worse the younger you are, but it's impacting all people. So if we can just other these young whippersnappers and say they're, and label them with a name like Gen Z. And like I said in our pre-recording, we would never do this ever. I hope, at least not maybe behind closed doors, and that's awful, and we all recognize that as awful. If we talked about our Black employees, our female employees, like our homosexual employees, we wouldn't do that because we've moved on as a society, recognize that that's wrong. We do it when we talk about Gen Z. We do. And so I think Stacy's dead on that this is a big piece of the why we do it. We don't have to take it so seriously if it's the other, if it's something wrong with their generation, and eventually they'll learn, as opposed to recognizing that even though it might be most intense in their generation, the things that they're bringing into the workforce are already there.
Well,
and I think it's dangerous.
Go ahead, Britni.
Go ahead.
Nope.
Who's going? Britni, go.
Deborah.
Who's going?
What was I going to say? Oh, I was going to ask a question of everyone that might take us off on a left turn. So I can ask it later. Deborah, go ahead and go.
Okay. Well, now I lost it.
Okay.
So
tell me if you're seeing this in your clients.
Can I just say something really quickly to David's point? One thing I will say to David's point, I thought all of us had something to say. Okay, before we go to that left turn, Britni, to David's point, I truly, honestly agree with you. I feel like that this is a change concern or change issue, but I think it's also a challenging of the why, right? Like it's okay for us to challenge a 5-day work week. And why do we need that 5-day work week? And we should maybe have a 4-day work week. But when, someone who is 19, 20, 21, 22 gets on TikTok and is having a breakdown because someone wants them to work on a Saturday and Sunday for 8 hours, everyone a day, everyone wants to laugh. Everyone wants to go, Gen Z sucks. Like, what's wrong with these kids? Like, what is wrong with this society? They have, zero ability to actually work a whole day. And my thing is why? Why do they need to work 16 hours to fulfill a social quote unquote perceived mandate of an 8-hour workday? Like right now, I sometimes work an 8-hour workday, and some days I work a 3-hour workday, and some days I work a 12-hour workday. Right. And I think that because we have this social way of working and how it's built, that we are trying to fit all of these folks that come on to be able to sustain these organizations into this way that we've already predefined, and people are rebelling and pushing back, and now it's a problem. And I'm sitting here and I'm just like, would it still be a problem at 63, 64, 65? Would it now be y'all are too old to work and you got tired of working and you need to just go ahead and retire, right? Is it a problem with the 30, 31, 32-year-old who's like, I can't work 16 hours on a weekend? I have a family, or I just want to have a mental health? Or is it only because this person was 20 saying that they don't want to show up? So I think it's something about us, period, right? Like being able to challenge and be okay with the challenge, and organizations taking a step back and saying, wait a minute, does this make sense? Do I really need people to come into the office? Do I really need people to work 5-6 hours a week? 5 or 6 days a week. Do I really need people to work 8-9 hours with an hour lunch and 2 15-minute breaks? Like, why is that a problem? And why, when people challenge it, is it a situation where it's a generational thing versus does it still make sense and it is still appropriate for the work that we do and everything that has changed in society and what we've been through?
Yeah, and to that point, I also think that it's a power thing, right? We A lot of this generational differences talk is a power thing. So I say, because I'm the older generation, be it baby boomers, Gen X, to these people that are coming into the organization, I can only have this conversation with people who agree with me, right? And with people, because we have the power right now in the organization. All of your suggestions, they're gonna like, I'm gonna kind of listen to them, but I'm not really taking them seriously, because as you said before, this is how we've done things all the time, right? This is how we've done things before, and you're challenging that is making me feel uncomfortable. And so I think, going back to the why is you challenging this making me feel uncomfortable, and how can we take the generation talk out of it and really just infuse it, as Britni said, with empathy and just hearing each other out and making sure that it makes sense for our company today. And I can't help but still think that that's why sometimes my clients have culture issues, because it's destabilizing when the new like cohort, to keep talking about it in the same terms, comes into the organization, challenges things, and then technology and everything challenges everything, and suddenly you're thinking, do I even need this website to help us do this type of work? Can I just use AI? Can I just use ChatGPT? Just saying anything, right? Like, we need to constantly be challenging ourselves as a company, because if not, as you said, Shannel, change is going to come. We're not going to know that it came, and we're just going to be surprised, and probably we're not going to figure out how to deal with it effectively.
Right. And that empathy is so important, because if you're in that older cohort and presumably have more tenure, well, I made something of myself in this environment, and now you're coming in trying to change it. What's that mean for me? Because I'm not familiar with this new technology or this new way of doing it. All I know is that I've been feeding my kids off of the old way. And so I think that empathy has to go both ways, because we have to understand what those barriers that people are putting up are there for. But despite what they say they are, to understand what they truly are.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, we have a question here. Should each industry approach taking generational responsibility differently, i.e., healthcare versus technology versus Wall Street? What do you all think?
The risks might be different. If you're a health network and your CEO thinks generations are absolutely true, therefore, every time somebody does something that seems to align with that generation, he's not or she's not going to have curiosity about what else was going on. So issues can stay bubbling and keep pushing up further and further, and people can literally die. So I do think there are different risks depending on what line of work you are. But even in tech, I mean, a bad culture could lead to terrible consequences. Okay, I have a question about what you're seeing in your clients. So, running a business is hard and complex in good times. In hard times, it gets way worse. Everyone takes extra load. People's jobs get expanded. They have to move more toward productivity than managing all these types of things. So I do have empathy for wanting to reach for things that seem to make a lot of sense and we can apply. And I think generations is one of those.
Mm-hmm.
I tend to see in my clients that if I'm hearing stuff like from the COO, CEO, general manager, things like nobody wants to work right anymore, or these young people just don't get it, they just can't hack it, we don't know what their issue is, I have started taking that as a sign that I need to go see if they actually have science in their hiring process, or if they're using things like personality tests. Because organizations, when they tend to reach for the easy thing, I know we called it lazy earlier, and Stacy kind of called us out, and maybe we shouldn't call it lazy, but that's how I think about it. But if they're reaching for these things that are really simple to understand and feel valid because, oh, well, I know a 20-year-old that thinks like that, they can tend to do that organization wide. And that just magnifies the risk with each system that we have that's rooted to something like a personality test that has nothing to do with science, and you could really break things. Are you guys seeing this in your clients, that the ones that tend to really buy into the whole generational thing, however they interpret that, are also tending to use unscientific things in their other systems?
I don't need that strong of a correlation. Um, right? I'm seeing a whole lot of organizations that just don't use science in the selection process, right? Like it's it's so big of a undertaking to use data and science in a selection process, and it's so much easier to use gut. Not even personality tests, Britni. You giving them too much.
Right.
This is like,
Right.
like I literally had a recruiter tell me the other day, like they use like 100% of their job is gut, right? Like a good story gets her, right? And it's like, I'm like a good story, right?
Right.
So it's one of those things where it's like, I don't even think it's that strong of a for me, for what I'm seeing, a correlation between the two. When it comes to the reaching for these generational kind of uh, assumptions versus kind of who they're bringing into the organization and how their hiring practices are.
Yeah, but Brittany, I think that you're onto something in the sense of if they're really thinking there's this problem generationally, then they might be translating the data that they have and cherry picking the data that's in front of them um, to create this issue, and I think that that's very dangerous because if we go by gut and we see that so and so and this person all feel this certain kind of way, or there's these outspoken people are all part of this generation and they're really hard to work with, then we're going to start making assumptions that and have these biases against all members of that generational cohort, and then that's going to be a real issue in terms of promotion, etc. And let's remember that unlike any other type of discrimination, when it comes to age discrimination, you can't discriminate against people who are 40 or older. It's like the law itself is written to allow for discrimination of your younger workers. It's insane. And I think that's a reflection on this misunderstanding of generations. So I think that there's definitely a problem that probably translates to other places of their business uh, when we're working off total gut instinct. I had a client who decided like the last test of the interview it would be nope, no hire if they didn't push in their chair behind them on their way out. They could have a great interview before then. Yeah, so there's a lot of that going on. But people are making these judgments based on the limited data they see and based on their past experiences, and that's why to plug us, that's why it makes sense to bring an IO or other form of data based consultant into your organization, because the answers are not as clear as our own biases tell us, but they are there. Like the data exists, and so we can take a look at that for them or with them. We have
I also
yeah. Sorry.
I wanted
Go
to
ahead.
also. Oh, okay. Let's just
No,
read that
please,
maybe.
Deborah.
No? Okay.
Deborah, and then
No,
Adam.
I love the question, Brittany. And I am seeing that with my clients all the time, where they are telling me there are no employees to work, nobody wants to work anymore. These young people don't, they just want to be in their computers and working, not actually, because I have a lot of service based clients, so they need people in their like restaurants or in their construction companies actually doing manual work. Um, and I just think it's really dangerous because you stop taking responsibility as a company. And I'll talk about what like a little bit more about that. It's that whenever I say, oh, it's them that don't want to work, I can justify then hiring just about anyone to fill a seat, not onboard them correctly, and then um, open myself up to even lawsuits when I actually fire that person, because this whole process before was just really, really broken. Right. So if I don't take responsibility as a company, because what I tell my clients is that's fine. That's a great argument for yourself. But what are you going to do? Not hire anyone ever, or not look at your processes ever, or not, like, are you just going to close shop because these people don't want to work? Like, we can't stay in that mentality because it's too dangerous. It creates a barrier that doesn't allow you to think critically about other things in your company that might not be working, and to be able to then retain those really hard employees that, like, you fought for those employees, you paid a lot of money for those employees to come in, but you don't have any other process that is going to be able to retain them. So I do think that that mentality is really dangerous, and it creates barriers for even growth. Not even just like just staying open. Like, you need to not, like, when we have that, we need to talk to our clients and have them take responsibility. Okay, but what are you doing as a company to make sure that these people that are different from you want to come work in your company? It's your responsibility. It's not their responsibility. I don't think it's their responsibility.
Hard agree.
Can we, before we go back to Adam,
Yeah.
I think, Britni, you responded to the last question, whoever the LinkedIn user was, but I don't think we got an opportunity to take a look at that before we went into your question.
Good call.
My whole thing is around this, is I'm not sure if it's taking generational responsibility, LinkedIn user. For me, it really depends on, well, the organization itself has to kind of look at who they're serving, who their clients are, and what services they are providing. And the reason why I say that is because if I'm in healthcare, all of a sudden you're dealing with perception, right? Like you get a 25-year-old doctor and people think something's wrong, right? Like, I'm getting, I got this little young kid trying to diagnose me, right? And the person could be like 50, they look 30. Right? Like it's, or if you're dealing in the Wall Street space, it's almost like this persona of, you have this idea of, if you are an older individual, right? One or two things: either you washed out or you got all the knowledge, and not everybody's going to respond to you or talk to you or put you in the same box, right? In the tech industry, it's kind of up in the air, right? Like it's kind of like, oh, you don't know anything about AI if you look about 60, right? Like it's this whole kind of organizational responsibility across these different industries that they have to deal with. So I don't know if it's necessarily an industry thing, but I think it's an organizational thing, right? And putting the onus back on the organizations to go, if you want the new skills and the fresh ideas, and you want to merge that with the experience and the people that have weathered the storms and understand kind of how to get us through things, you need to create an environment, whatever industry you are, that allows for these folks to organically be able to mesh their responses and experiences into something that's going to continuously make the organization successful, but them happy as well.
Yes. You have biases in your organization, like baked into the organization and baked into the leadership. You've got to figure out what those biases are. But you definitely have biases around generations somewhere, right? Adam says, I just got a rejection from a potential job after taking the personality assessment. Sorry, Adam. I definitely always wonder if the companies using them have any sort of validation methods behind it, or if they just see a simple tool to use without asking the tougher questions. Adam, please email me, or who else wants Adam to email them what personality assessment was used. I'll let you know how much validity that assessment has. But at no point during the selection process, and maybe this is good for a future show, but at no point in the selection process should a personality assessment be a one and done. It should help inform the other elements. So even if it's a validated assessment, it needs to be used responsibly. Anybody else have anything to add to that?
Yeah. My local SHRM chapter did a whole training on how to use personality assessments in hiring, and it felt like a gut punch. I was so sad that they were spending time on that, when they could be pushing into the more scientifically validated ways to hire people that are going to last.
If you're doing personality assessments, Big Five, lots of validity behind that.
I'm like a no for personality assessments. I just don't want them in the hiring process. There's if you want to have fun with them and put them into the little trainings you do and your little culture exercise, whatever. But just take it out of the
team building.
Right. Thank you. That's what we call them.
Yeah. when your clients are still allowing the term whistleblower to guide decision making for promoting, does it help or hinder the company's progress? Anybody? Are we just gonna leave this one?
Deborah,
You know what?
close your
We've
mouth.
No, I actually don't understand the question. Maybe it's my culture background. What? I don't understand this question.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
especially in conservative companies, whistleblower is just a way to like code someone that you really don't want around or to have any kind of power.
Yeah. They tell
And
the company secrets.
and we've got another one, Jasmine Kelly. Hi, Jasmine.
Whoop,
Such a
whoop.
great point, Deborah. There are with 3 Ys. Too many people who are searching for work, but the narrative says otherwise. It's easier to say no one wants to work when your turnover is extremely high rather than focusing on retention strategies. Yeah, a lot of
Thank you.
companies during the Great Resignation made a lot of money. That's for
Yeah.
sure.
Okay. We have about 5 minutes left, so we should each go around and do our little takeaway. If you're a CEO and you're listening to this, or you're the people manager, we're all IOs here and we really want to push into the science, but you may not have the resources to be able to push to the science, but you also don't want to be on the other side where you're just leaning on these flimsy frameworks to make decisions or to interpret what's happening in your workforce. My advice.
Sorry, that's just me. Sorry.
That's fine.
Her advice.
My takeaway for you is to push into empathy. Teach your managers how to be open and curious in their one-on-ones and in their team meetings, and to place take, to realize their experience absolutely is not anyone else's experience at the table. If they're open and curious, they can better take the place of the person in front of them. And then whatever the challenge is, whether it's a power dynamic, it's a DEI thing, it's a generational thing, it's a personality thing, whatever it is, when you walk up to that challenge with empathy, you're open and curious and you're willing to take their place, things are going to get to the truth much more quickly and the solutions will make a lot of sense and be longer lasting. David.
All right. Oh, that was I thought you were pitching for all of us. I thought you were about to introduce all of us. Okay. My thing is, this was a great conversation, and thank you all for contributing to it. We got a lot of contributions from the audience today, so I love that. But yeah, I would point you back toward data and questioning your biases. Why are you pushing back at the people you're pushing back on, whoever that is? What do they represent to you? Like I pointed out or suggested earlier, a lot of the generational bias against those younger generations may be out of fear or bias against change. And if that's the case, we should be exploring that. I think it's really, really important that you don't ignore your feelings, and instead we get to the bottom of it without necessarily labeling it generations or generational differences, but that we start with the solutions you're looking for, the problems that go a little bit deeper.
Should I go?
Deborah, what's your takeaway? Yeah.
Okay. I think my biggest takeaway is that we need to ask organizations, we need to, yes, ask why, to David's point, but also take responsibility. And really, as organizations and as decision makers, really inspect our biases against the perceived generations. Like, what are you constantly saying in your organization about these generations? That's one. Just listen to yourself, right? Really ask why that is challenging for you, or why is that challenging for other members of your organization, and to then make sure that it doesn't become a barrier for growth. And when I say that, is just to make sure that you're taking responsibility. For example, as we just said, people don't want to work. We're not going to get any new employees. Well, if you have that mentality, it's not going to happen. So take ownership, take responsibility for the processes that are within your organization, to make sure that everyone, not just a group or generation cohort, is successful. including the newer generations that are coming into the workforce.
Awesome.
Shannel.
Awesome. So biggest takeaway for me was, and not even necessarily the takeaway, but more so for our folks at the top is prepare for the shared experiences within your workplace versus looking at these quote unquote generational differences, right? If you are preparing for those shared experiences alongside of looking at what future state skills and abilities and knowledge you're going to need in order to remain competitive in your organization, then you need to build an organization that has a safe space for the skills, the new skills, the fresh ideas to coexist with your individuals that's been there, done that, and have lessons learned that you can package those two together, right? So if you want to continue making money, you can't have one without the other. So I know everyone cares about their bottom line, right? So everyone wants to be at the tip of the spear, and they want to be able to, have the hot new skills into their workforce. But you can't silence the voices that are behind the skills that are bringing in the workforce. You need to create a space for them and challenge your biases to be able to have a healthy workplace where people want to stay.
Yes. And because as the technical advisor, which doesn't make sense because I'm not Generation Z on this cast, I have to apologize that I don't have like our QR codes all set up in the right order, so it would be a jumble. So, but please follow us, both our page and our individual LinkedIn. Connect with us so that we can continue the conversation. And all of our contact information should be in there. If anybody wants to give out specific contact information beyond their LinkedIn page, please do. Also, don't forget to get all your IO psychology swag from Shannel's.
Swag!
What is it again? What's the page?
IO Psych Nerd Etsy shop.
IO Psych Nerd Etsy shop. Etsy shop.
The Etsy shop.
Etsy shop. Okay. All right. Anything else? Any last words?
Nope.
All right.
Join us next month.
We'll see you then.
All right. Bye, guys.